Welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available for your operation to manage healthy cows and calves while producing the highest quality dairy products. Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the ISU Dairy Team. I'm Jen Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, and I'm here with my colleague today, Larry Tranel, our Northeast and Southeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, as we discuss his most recent publication, Understanding Farm Personalities, Why We Act As We Do. So welcome back to this podcast, Larry.
Appreciate that, Jen. Good to be here.
Yeah, so we've had you on this podcast quite a bit talking about farm stress and farm resiliency, farm personalities. And over your extension career, you've worked with many farm families and no doubt dealt with many personalities that have both strengths and probably weaknesses to them. Give us an overview of your work in this area and why this most recent publication on understanding personalities is important to our farm families.
Well, as you may know, Jen, I've kind of been a personality junkie probably since the early 1990s, and with a background in psychology. I guess it's always just something I've always had an interest in pursuing. And as I started working with farm families over the years and sitting down at the table, especially with husbands and wives, but sometimes with the kids involved as well, you just really notice that there's some of their difficulties are working through not just a communication skill, but I just think a misunderstanding of how people's brains operates. Because when you take a look at personalities, it's something that it's how we think, and it's how we behave, and it's how we act. And so when you take a look, and also how we feel. And so when you take a look at the combination of those people or those kind of things, some people just kind of act first, other people think first, and other people tend to be high feelers. And so they come at it from a different perspective. And they basically say that 95% of the conflict that people tend to have in their relationships actually tend to be from how people prefer to deal with the situation versus the actual issue at hand.
Yeah, I found your most recent publication pretty interesting. And now I feel like I'm a little bit more conscious when I'm working with colleagues, I'm working with family members, industry people, and I'm a little bit more cognizant of personalities since reviewing this article. And so you have this, what you call the farm personality trait pyramid model. So tell us more about that and how it relates to our farm personalities and farm stress.
Okay, so basically, I think as background, those personalities become so important with those farm families. And I guess over the course of my career, I've really tried to take a look at a lot of research that people have with farm personalities. And there's a lot of different types of, aspects of personality that people try to have researched and work with. And so when people take these like personality tests, there's probably 100 or 200 different types of personality tests, and maybe even more. So there's a lot of different ways we can try to work with this. But I think I've kind of come down to a core belief that there's certain facets that tend to impact us as people, impact us within agriculture, and impact us within marriages and family relationships as they're dealing with the farm and things like that. So the first one is basically the top of the pyramid, is just the locus of control. So people either have an internal locus of control and an external locus of control, or someplace in between. But that people that have the internal locus of control really tend to take charge of their life a lot more than people that have this external locus of control, which is kind of things, let things happen to them. They might live their life by other people's expectations and what they want from them. So you can probably sense that it's probably not as healthy to live with that external locus of control compared to an internal one. The second one that I tend to find, and this is probably, I put as probably as much stock in this one as I do many of the other traits. And it's basically just a communication skill and a kind of our go-to of how we want to communicate with people as an introvert or an extrovert, or for those people that are kind of in the middle, kind of what I call ambiverts. And so introverts tend to be actually more intuitive. So they may not communicate quite as much as what the extroverts do, but they've got a thought process going on. And so I'm not going to say one is, type of aspect, introvert, extrovert is better than the other, where the extroverts tend to maybe have what they call a lot of friends, but they may not be very close friends, where the introverts might have, just a few friends, but they tend to be pretty close with that. And just as they, dealing with people, and the introverts tend to get tired out when they deal with people for long periods of time. And the extroverts, they just need to go where people are when they spend a lot of time alone. So I use this example quite often of this introverted husband who may be out working as a salesperson all day, dealing with people. When he comes home at night, what does he want to do besides maybe sit on the couch, stare at a wall, just do something just to recharge his batteries by being alone? And he might be married to somebody that might have been working from home all day, as an extroverted person hasn't seen an adult all day. And basically, when he comes home, she just needs to communicate this, that, and the other thing. So you can kind of see how those two personalities might have a little bit of conflict when one gets home from their day job. So the third one is kind of the middle level, is kind of passive, reactive, and proactive. And so it kind of relates, I think, a lot to the internal locus of control. But people that tend to be more proactive tend to take care of their problems and deal with them. And so again, that internal locus control, I think, is highly related to it versus someone that's very passive and reactive and just doesn't want to deal with it. Because we know stress-wise, the biggest thing you can do when you experience a lot of stress and have a lot of things to do is to try to narrow the distance between you and the stress. So that's basically to do something. So those people that are reactive and passive, they may not do something right away to try to deal with the stress. The fourth level is what I call the most important one, I think, from my perspective. In it's an area about, again, personalities defined as how people feel, how they think, and how they act. And that acting is broken down between doers and orderers. So it's kind of like the order and chaos, is that some people tend to order everything in their life time wise. Everything's got its place, and the doers might just be more of a on the whim type of a thing, never taking a map, never making plans for what they do. They just kind of react to the world and this, that, and the other thing. So when we take a look at the feelers, I tend to say when we take a look at farm stress, that they may be some of the ones that tend to have highest levels, just because when things aren't going wrong, they feel so bad about it. When you take a look at levels of anxiety and depression, they're the ones that tend to be the first ones that probably experience it. We do know that women tend to be higher on the feeling scale than what men do. They also tend to be higher on the order scale than what men tend to be. So when you take a look at personality differences between men and women, they're actually more similar than they are different, but we can pick up some of those differences with that as well. The last level, and this is kind of a long answer to the question, but the last level deals with the 5-trait model, which is probably the most researched model, and is probably the one I put the most stock in if I'm going to be in a counselor phase or just dealing with somebody pretty in depth with it. And so those go from aspects of neuroticism and agreeableness and conscientiousness, openness, and extroversion. And so the extroversion in this case may not be the same definition as the introvert extrovert here. The extroversion here might be like somebody that's really high in positive emotion. And the neuroticism on the left side is kind of what we call negative emotion. So here's where I tend to say, like, for people that are on this pyramid, on the left side of this pyramid all the way down, I think tend to probably are the ones that I kind of watch out for the most in trying to experience farm stress. And if I was going to pick out any of these traits, in their dealing with stress themselves, I'd try to pick out this negative trait of neuroticism, which is negative emotion, because, our brains have been trained for so many years to protect ourselves. Okay, so that protection often tends to be, what can I do to protect myself so I don't get hurt? And it often is full of negative emotion with that. So research will actually show that women tend to be higher in neuroticism than what men do. And there's some reasons they actually list for that. They have to be more protective and just who they are, what they're about. And when we take a look at the thought process of women tend to be just higher in emotion in total, both positive emotion and also negative emotion. But that neuroticism, again, whether you're male or female, is one that I really encourage people to really try to focus on, because there's highly neurotic people that don't see themselves as being high in negative emotion, even though all their friends and families probably know that they are. Okay, but it's just something that when people take a look at one trait, that's probably one of the biggest ones I'd probably take a look at. So when we take a look at the model, it deals with about 5 different factors of different levels of people's personalities and aspects. And so we're probably trying to deal with maybe 15 to 20 different aspects of people's personalities in that model.
And Larry, I know over the last few years, as we host the farm couple getaways, this topic of farm personalities seems to be a highlight to our couples. When we, evaluate them at the end, they really start to understand why they do certain things that they do, and they start to kind of learn more about the workings of their own personalities and then of their spouse's personalities. So Can you share some highlights of what you've seen working with farm couples and using that personality instrument?
Yeah, so and Jen, you've probably been sitting there when you see the light bulb that goes on in some of these couples as they go through this. But I remember one that we did here in Dubuque, and somebody just said, "Well, no wonder she's been saying that or acting like that for the last 20 years." Okay, so it's something so simple as whether it be a person that might be a little bit more emotional versus the husband that might be more of a thought processor. Why do they get so cry so easy, or just because, and partly is because their emotions are right there. They wear them on their sleeves or whatever. So just a simple understanding of being a thinker or a feeler or an orator, and just somebody that's dealing with somebody that doesn't like to order whatsoever and just likes kind of more of the chaos and party waiting to happen type thing. So when you take a look at those four personality traits of the feeler, the thinker, the orderer, and the doer, I think it's just very important that people understand what's my number one go-to, what's my number two go-to, and what might be not so much my weakest trait, but it's just a tendency that I don't have to go very far. And I don't understand that person that has to put all their socks a certain way in a drawer. And I don't understand maybe that person that has to be, if they're not 10 minutes early, they're late. Just the concept of time and place, everything's got a place and everything's got a spot for themselves, and how they can work with that versus somebody that's a little bit more just happy-go-lucky and then just take life as it comes. And so when you take a look at all those traits, yeah, I think it really gets into a lot of people's relationships, that they think maybe they've got communication problems. I think they just don't understand each other's personalities and their go-tos.
Yeah, that's for sure. And probably another important thing to note is as you take these personality tests, you can probably score a little bit differently in your working life versus in your home life, right? So you may be a little bit more orderly, let's say at home or maybe at work versus the opposite. So how would you recommend somebody going through this personality trait to assess themselves?
Yeah, so when we're working with couples, I'll tend to say, who you are when you're working at home with your spouse, with your kids or whatever. If I'm working in a business thing, I might say, if this is trying to get to know each other in the workplace, I'll say, well, I want you to answer this how you are, or how you think you are in the workplace, because you definitely do have some personality. So case in point, I mean, I've got a personality. If I think of some people with personalities that think everybody always thought I was a thinker, just because I work a lot of spreadsheets and just working a lot of high thought process type stuff that I've worked in my extension career over the years. And that's actually one of my lower ones. So I tend to be a feeler, and I tend to be an orderer, then a thinker, and then a doer. And I've had other people in my life that said, well, they always thought I was a doer because I was out doing, this, that, or the other thing. And just whether it be with music or just a lot of creativity type things that, people have different relative strengths on all these personality traits. Okay, so one of the thoughts is that even though the doer is the least of mine, I could still be stronger maybe in that doer site or suit than what somebody actually has that as their number one. But when you take a look at the whole issue of these personality assessments, I think just when you take a look at their strengths and weaknesses, that each of us have one or two go-to type strengths, and it's probably not that much different in the workplace than it is at home. Okay, unless you're really forced to be out of your personality trait type thing. And if you are, so if you're a doer type person that has to be extremely orderly at work, day in and day out, when you go home, I suspect you're not going to be very orderly whatsoever. You're going to be kind of that go-to of who you can be at when you're by yourself or in your own time.
So we talked about the personality trait model, and if people want more in-depth interpretation of personality assessments, do you have another model that you use?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, the one that is probably the most researched one is the 5-factor model. And so you can actually do that online of understandmypersonality.com, I think is the website. And so when you take a look at the neuroticism, the agreeableness, the conscientiousness, the openness, and the extroversion, we can actually break each of those traits down into two more. So like neuroticism is broken down into volatility and withdrawal. Okay, so there's a kind of coping mechanisms that people that have negative emotion tend to have. The agreeableness, okay, so this is another one where women tend to be higher than men. So women tend to be more agreeable. They tend to be more compassionate and polite, which are the two factors that are broken down from the agreeableness. When we look at conscientiousness, it's broken down into industriousness and orderliness. And again, women tend to be higher in orderliness. And so you take a look at just, who really orders things sometimes in the home, in the workplace, and things like that. It tends to be women that tend to have a stronger trait in that than men do. And the openness to both experience and to intellect. And then the last one, the extroversion, which is enthusiasm, again, that positive emotion, but also our assertiveness about getting things done, kind of that internal locus of control and being proactive. So there are some of these traits actually kind of relate back into some of these other types of models that are out there as well. But I think if people are really working in, like say, a counselor situation where they're really trying to go at the depths of somebody's relationship, I would probably tend to go to this 5-factor model. If I'm going to work with, couples, farm couples, and just people in a general fashion, I'm probably going to go to that personality box instrument that has that 4-person model about how people feel, think, order, or do.
Well, Larry, you gave us a lot of great information and a lot for us to think about as we assess our own personalities and help assess maybe other people that we're working with in our farming families. And I would encourage our listeners to read the publication in more in depth, and I'll include that in the show notes here today. But as we conclude, Larry, what are some key messages you'd like our listeners to know when we're dealing with farm personalities?
So I think the biggest thing is just that people do have different personalities, and they have differences in how they want to deal with issues, no matter what the issue is. Again, kind of coming back to that most of the conflict is how we prefer to deal with the issue, not usually the issue at hand. And just knowing that and helping people understand that those different personalities are at play here. Sometimes because sometimes there's too much focus on, it's because of their communication skill. And sometimes these personalities play heavily into communication skill. But I think that's probably one of the biggest things. The second take-home message I would put is that there's a huge impact on their trait of being introverts versus extroverts. And again, a lot in the middle that might be an ambivert that can go very comfortably either way. But people that are heavy introverts and people that are heavy extroverts, for them to regain their energy, they need to go to their go-to, which is basically, if you're an introvert, you need your alone time. And if you're an extrovert, you need your time to get out and deal with people. Okay, so in marriages, I think it's probably where I see it come to play the most, because a lot of times we do have an introvert that's married to an extrovert in those marriages, and just as they need to regain their energy, people just need to understand those types of things. And I would say the third take-home message is just, if people keep in their mind the feeling, the thinker, so the feeler, the thinker, the orderer, and their doer, and just where they might fall and what they prefer to do things. And so we need to realize that these feeling type people, their feelings are probably more important to them sometimes than their thoughts. And the people that are thinkers, they can't imagine people let their feelings get the best of them, because they should be able to think this thing through. So I think there's just a lot of things that are going on to people's personalities that we at least need to have those 4 quadrants working with it. And I say with the last take home is that for people that tend to have high levels of neuroticism, it's probably one of the biggest predictors of divorce, and for people to not be happy in their lives when they have these high levels of neuroticism, and even just even above normal levels of neuroticism. And so if we're one of those people, I just tend to think that we should figure out a way to recognize it and try to deal with it, because we realize that a lot of positive psychology that comes from how to make people happier, to how to reduce the stress in their lives, tends to be from having just a happier demeanor, not that negative emotion.
Again, thanks, Larry, for all that great information. And I'm sure our listeners could contact you if they have further questions on your publication or need further help kind of assessing, what they read on the personality assessments. They could definitely reach out to you as well. And again, I'll include that in the show notes here today. So again, I thank our listeners, and we look forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from ISU.
Thank you.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.